The wind carried the bite of coming snow, curling through the rusted slats of the rail fence as Rufus Blake stepped out of the barn and pulled his coat tighter. He looked out over the frozen pasture, the horses bunched in a corner under a gray sky, and for a moment, the world stood too still. The kind of stillness that made a man think too much. Rufus hated that. He preferred noise. Hooves clattering, ropes snapping, dogs barking. Anything to keep from hearing the echo of his own thoughts. He carried himself like the kind of man who'd already lived a lifetime. His eyes were worn, as if he saw through things most folks missed. He didn't talk much, and when he did, it was quiet and sharp. People in town said he'd once been someone else, back east, maybe, or down in Texas, but they didn't press. Everyone knew Rufus had his reasons for keeping to himself. He ran his ranch like clockwork, never came to church, didn't drink, and barely looked at women. The kind of man nobody tried to get close to. But there was something else about him. Something off. Something buried. He'd once carried a badge, or so the rumors went. Maybe he'd seen too much. Or maybe he'd done things he couldn't forgive himself for. Whatever the truth was, it lived behind his eyes like smoke behind glass. Always shifting, always waiting to pour out if the seal cracked. That morning, he meant to ride into town just for feed and nails. Nothing more. He didn't care much for town either. Too many eyes, too many people trying to smile at him like they didn't mean it. But then he'd seen her, standing by the rail outside the saloon, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, a suitcase at her feet, and that look in her eyes that said she'd already been told no one too many times. She wasn't like the girls who worked the parlor inside. She looked proud, even though she clearly didn't have a dime to her name. Skin pale as snow, long hair tucked under a hat too big for her, lips cracked from cold. She stood straight, hands balled in her sleeves, like she wasn't about to beg even if she starved for it. He would have passed her by. Should have. But her voice stopped him, low, raspy, not from age but from where. "You going west?" she asked. He turned slow, not sure she was talking to him. She was. "I ain't got money, but I can work," she said. "Clean, cook, whatever you need." He stared at her, the way a man stares at something he knows better than to touch. "Don't need anyone." She shrugged. "Don't got anywhere else to stand." Something about her wasn't right. He could feel it, but that same feeling was what made him speak again. "What's your name?" "Sadie." He squinted. "Sadie what?" She hesitated, just long enough to confirm the lie was coming. "Sadie Wright." It wasn't, but he let it slide. He should have left her there. And yet, he found himself nodding once, jerking his chin toward the horse tied behind him. "Get in the wagon." They rode in silence most of the way, the snow starting to fall in soft flakes. She didn't talk, didn't fidget, didn't ask where they were going. Just watched the road like she was trying to memorize it in case she had to run. He didn't ask her anything else until they were halfway home. "You from around here?" "No, you got family?" "Not anymore." "Trouble follow you?" She paused. Then, "Don't it always?" Rufus grunted and let it drop. At the ranch, she stepped down without asking where to go. She carried her suitcase like it was made of stone, and when she entered the main house, she moved quiet as a shadow. She didn't ask to see her room, didn't comment on the cold, didn't seem scared or surprised. Just took it in like she'd been in worse. That night, Rufus sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the wall, running over the same questions he always did when something changed. What did he just bring into his life? Why her? Why now? He didn't take people in. He didn't let himself get tangled. Yet something in her eyes reminded him of an old ache he hadn't looked at in years. 3 days passed. She kept to herself, cleaned the place top to bottom without being told, chopped wood like a farmhand, patched the broken latch on the barn door. She didn't complain, didn't ask for anything, and yet somehow made it harder to breathe with how quiet she was. She was hiding something. He knew it, as sure as he knew the storm would hit by Sunday. On the fourth night, he caught her outside the barn, hands shaking as she tried to light a cigarette. She cursed under her breath when a match snapped. "Don't smoke out here." "Hay's dry," he said. She didn't flinch. just sighed and tossed the matchstick. "You know I ain't who I said I am," she said finally. Rufus crossed his arms. "Didn't figure you were." She looked up at him then, snowflakes catching in her lashes. "My name's Sadie Lindell. My father's name was Avery Lindell." That name hit like a shot of cold whiskey. Avery Lindell had been a gambler, a con man, and a cheat. The kind who wore fine suits and swindled ranchers out of their land with forged deeds and rigged games. He'd vanished 2 years ago, just before a mob of men came looking for payback. Rufus hadn't cared either way. Men like Lindell always met the same end. "I ain't like him," Sadie said quickly, as if reading his face. "He left me in a whorehouse up in Sheridan when I was 16. Took every cent I'd saved, then ran. Haven't seen him since." "Why'd you lie?" She shrugged. "A Lindell ain't welcome in most places." "Still ain't." She dropped her gaze. "I know." Rufus didn't say more, just turned and walked back toward the house, each step heavier than the last. He should have told her to leave then, but he didn't. Inside, he poured a drink. First one in over a year. Sat in the dark and tried not to remember all the things men like her father had done to men like him. It wasn't just about cheating. It was about turning good folks bitter, making them desperate, pushing them to shoot first and pray later. Avery Lindell had cost Rufus more than money. He'd cost him the last thread of belief he had in anything decent. And now his daughter was under his roof. But she wasn't like her father, at least not yet. Still, Rufus knew the world didn't make people hard for no reason. It carved them into what they had to be. And something told him she'd seen enough of the world's edge to start turning into something sharp herself. What he didn't know was that she wasn't just running from her past. She was waiting, because someone was coming for her. And Sadie Lindell had already decided what she'd do when they did. It started with a man on horseback. He came trotting up the road to the ranch 2 days after Sadie told Rufus her real name. Rufus spotted him through the frost-glazed window as he saddled down at the gate, moved like someone used to watching his own back. Younger than Rufus by a few years, but already weathered, with a scar down one side of his jaw and the kind of confidence that came from walking into bad places and getting out alive. Sadie stepped out onto the porch behind Rufus just as the stranger tipped his hat. She froze. Rufus didn't miss the way her hand curled tight around the doorframe. The man gave her a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't expect to find you here, Red." Rufus turned toward her. "Friend of yours?" Sadie's voice was low. "Used to be." The man dismounted slow, brushing the dust off his coat. "Name's Julian Cade. I'm a long way from Fort Wallace, but heard tell a Miss Lindell might be wandering this stretch. Seems that rumor's true." Rufus didn't like the way he said her name. Half warm, half warning. "What do you want with her?" Julian's smile stayed sharp. "I just want to talk. Old times, you know." Sadie didn't move. "You weren't asking about old times the last time I saw you." Rufus didn't press, but when Julian turned to tie off his horse, Rufus leaned down and said to Sadie, "He stays outside." Julian camped near the barn that night, claiming he was just passing through. But nobody rides 200 miles to pass through. Not with eyes like his, always scanning, always thinking 10 seconds ahead. That night, Sadie didn't eat. She sat in her room, her face drawn, fingers trembling as she stitched a torn sleeve over and over without ever tying it off. By morning, Julian was still there. Said he wanted to help out for a few days in exchange for shelter. Rufus didn't like it, but the man worked, knew horses could mend fence like a soldier, and never once asked for pay. But there was something off about him. The way he watched Sadie, the way she avoided his eyes. Whatever history they had, it wasn't clean. A week later, the second man showed up. Merrick Doyle, traveling preacher. Or so he claimed. He rode up with a Bible in one hand and a rifle in the other. His wagon full of books and empty crates, his words wrapped in velvet, but his gaze too quick to be holy. Said he was headed west to set up a mission, but had run short of supplies. Asked if he could trade sermons for shelter. Rufus didn't trust men who smiled too much. And Doyle smiled like he'd just won something. But the ranch was quiet, and they had room, and Sadie, oddly, seemed fine with him. Too fine. That night, after dinner, Doyle offered to read scripture. Rufus declined, but Sadie stayed behind. Sat near the fire while Doyle read from the book of Job, voice smooth as river stone. Later, she confessed she knew him. He used to come to my father's games, she said quietly, wiping down dishes. Never played. Just watched. Always stayed late. You trust him? Sadie paused. No, but know the kind of man he is. That helps. Rufus didn't push, but he watched Doyle closely after that. The man didn't do anything wrong, exactly, but he lingered in rooms too long, looked through drawers when no one was around. He asked questions, gentle ones, but with purpose about Rufus's land, his livestock, his past. Rufus gave him nothing. Still, between Julian and Doyle, the house felt colder, tighter. Sadie barely spoke, and when Rufus asked what they were all really here for, she gave him only silence. One night, while checking the south fence line, Rufus found Julian digging near the creek. Said he lost a coin. Rufus didn't believe it. Later, he followed Julian to the barn and overheard him whispering through the slats of the far stall. Not to a person, but into thin air, as if someone was supposed to be listening. The next morning, Doyle tried to leave. Said he'd received word from the Lord that he was needed farther west. Rufus didn't stop him. Let him go. But when he searched Doyle's wagon after he left, something caught his eye. Tucked inside a false bottom was a telegram. One line, girl heading west under alias. Find her before Cadence does. Cadence. Rufus hadn't heard that name in 5 years. She'd been the devil in red lace. A woman who ran a smuggling ring out of Kansas City and used gambling houses as her fronts. Cold, smart, and always 10 steps ahead. Rumor was she'd trained Sadie's father before he got greedy and crossed her. And now she was after the daughter. That night, Rufus confronted Sadie. She didn't lie. Cadence is looking for me, she said. She thinks I have something that belonged to my father. Do you? Sadie reached in her boot and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. A bank cipher. Nonsense at first glance. But Rufus had seen this kind of code before, when he'd worked federal cases tracking land fraud. This paper led to something. Something worth killing for. My father kept this with him always, Sadie said. Said it was the key to everything he built. Before he died, he mailed it to me. I didn't open it until 2 weeks ago. He's dead. Sadie looked away. He was shot in the back by someone he trusted. Rufus stared at her. And now they think you've got the prize. Sadie nodded. Julian wants it. Doyle was trying to get it. But Cadence, she's the one I'm worried about. Rufus exhaled hard. The wind outside howled, rattling the shutters. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know if I could trust you either. It was honest. That made it worse. Rufus got up and poured a glass of water. His hand shook more than he liked. You thought I'd sell you out? I thought you might send me away, she said softly. That's all anyone's ever done. He turned to her then, really looked, and for the first time, he saw the edge of her, not just sharp but scared, tired, not from running, but from always having to look over her shoulder. You should have known better, he said. She stepped closer, voice low. I'm starting to. Still, something didn't sit right. Julian had come sniffing too fast. Doyle had shown up too curious. Even Cadence's name fell off, like a ghost from a different story. And Rufus knew, from the pit of his gut, that the real play hadn't even started yet. Everyone was here for something, but no one had told the truth. Not even Sadie, and maybe not even Rufus himself. Rufus never saw the bullet coming. It tore through the upper beam of the barn, splintering wood above his head as he dove behind a bale of hay. The shooter didn't fire again, just one shot, a warning. Or maybe they'd missed on purpose. Either way, it was the first real strike, and it changed everything. He stayed crouched, his revolver out, until the wind picked up and nothing moved for minutes. When he stepped outside, Julian was gone. So was his horse. And Sadie, too, gone without a word. That's when Rufus realized he'd misread all of it. He thought Julian was the threat, Doyle was the spy, and Sadie was the one running. But it wasn't that clean. It never was. Inside the house, he found Sadie's shawl on the floor and the cipher missing from where he'd hidden it under the floorboards. His first thought was she'd taken it. His second, more painful, was that she'd given it to someone else. He searched for 2 hours before finding a single boot print behind the haystack by the back fence. Fresh, light, Sadie's. But next to it, deeper, larger, facing her was another set. Men's boots, not Julian's. He would have left a mess. This was someone else. Someone who'd come quietly and taken her without a sound. He rode hard into town, hoping she'd double back, hoping she was stupid enough to get on a stagecoach. But no one had seen her. Not that day, not the one before. He slept in his saddle that night, 30 miles from the ranch, not sure if he was chasing her or waiting for her to chase him. 3 days passed with nothing. Then a letter. It was waiting for him when he returned to the ranch, tucked under the porch rail, held by a single nail. No address, just his name, scrawled in Sadie's careful script. Rufus, you'll think I ran. Maybe I did, but not the way you think. He came for me. Someone I knew would eventually find me. I didn't tell you because I wanted to believe I was free. I'm not. I never was. I'll explain when it's done. Sadie, there was no return. No clue. Just when it's done. Rufus knew then. The game wasn't about the cipher. That had just been the spark. The real fire was somewhere deeper, buried under years of lies and deals made in back rooms and whispered names that only criminals and cowards remembered. He started digging. He rode north to Fort Wallace and paid off a man named Pike who used to run cards for Sadie's father. The man had a melted ear and cloudy eye, but when Rufus dropped a stack of bills on the table, Pike remembered everything. She was the smart one, Pike said. Not him. She kept the books, watched the players, knew when someone was hiding an ace. He drank and smiled, but she ran the table. She ever talk about Cadence? Pike laughed. Cadence made her. What do you mean? Girl was 10 when she started cleaning chips. By 15, she was reworking the payout system. Cadence saw that, used her, trained her to watch the men, learn their habits, find their weaknesses. That's why Cadence couldn't kill her daddy outright. He had too much dirt, so she tried to buy him. Didn't work. Then she went for the girl. Rufus leaned forward. And now, Cadence is broke, hiding out somewhere in Colorado, burned too many bridges. But if she's trying to get Sadie back, it's because she thinks the girl still has something worth selling. Like what? Pike shrugged. Could be secrets. Could be that cipher. Or it could be revenge. Revenge. That made more sense than anything else. Rufus rode west. Spent 4 days searching, asking, bribing. And finally, in a grimy border town called Alabaster Falls, he found a girl who used to work under Cadence. A barkeep. She said Cadence was gone, killed in a fire 6 months ago. Or so they say, she whispered. Truth is, someone pulled her out, paid the undertaker to fake the whole thing. Rufus asked who. The barkeep said the name slow, like it hurt to say it. Julian Cade. Everything snapped into place. Julian hadn't just been sniffing after Sadie for the cipher. He'd been working with Cadence. Probably always had. Probably loved her once. Maybe still did. And now, he was finishing the job. But that didn't explain why Sadie went willingly. Unless she hadn't. Unless she was playing a longer game. Rufus rode toward the mountains, where the old smuggling trails crossed into Colorado. He tracked campfire smoke, watched the signs. And 3 days into the ride, he found them. A cabin, half buried in snow, hidden in the pines. Julian was there, standing on the porch with a rifle. Rufus saw him before he saw Rufus. But he didn't raise the gun. Been waiting for you, Julian said. Rufus dismounted slow. Where is she? Julian tilted his head toward the cabin. Inside. Alive. For now. I'm not here to talk. Then you better shoot first, because I won't miss. They stared each other down. Then the cabin door opened, and Sadie stepped out. Bruised. Dirty. But standing. Don't, she said to both of them. Julian's jaw tightened. You think he came to save you? He's just another man looking to own what he can't understand. Sadie walked down the steps. I came here on purpose. Rufus froze. You what? I needed to know what he'd do. I needed to be sure he still worked for Cadence. Julian looked like he'd been slapped. You used me. Sadie didn't blink. You were using me first. Julian's voice cracked. I loved you. No, you loved that I could make you rich again. Julian raised the rifle. Rufus reached for his gun. Then a shot rang out from the trees. Julian dropped. Sadie screamed. From the woods, a woman stepped forward. Middle-aged, hairpin high, red coat, elegant as death. Cadence. She walked slow, heels crunching snow. I didn't want it to end like this, she said, looking down at Julian. But he stopped being useful. Sadie backed up. You're supposed to be dead. I was. But then I realized I'd rather be something worse. Rufus lifted his revolver. Don't move. Cadence smiled. You don't even know what you're fighting for. She pulled something from her coat, a second cipher, matching Sadie's. Rufus looked to Sadie. What is that? My father made two, Sadie whispered. One real, one fake. He sent me the real one. I think. Cadence laughed. Oh, honey, he gave you the one that wouldn't get you killed. And I just killed the one man who could tell me which is which. She stepped forward, slow and calm. So now we guess. Unless you're willing to trade. For what? Rufus asked. Cadence's eyes flicked to Sadie. Her. No, Rufus said. Yes, Sadie said. Rufus turned. What? Sadie was pale, shaking. I'll go with her. If it keeps you alive. The hell you will. I have to. Cadence smiled. Oh, how noble. Then Sadie reached in her coat and threw the real cipher into the fire pit. Cadence screamed, lunged. Rufus fired. Cadence dropped, blood blooming through her coat. Silence fell. Sadie sank to her knees. Rufus ran to her, pulling her close, checking her for wounds. She shook her head. I'm fine. Just tired. Julian lay still. Cadence didn't move. Rufus held her as the snow began to fall harder. Around them, the cold closed in. I didn't want this, Sadie whispered. I know, Rufus said. But now you're free. She looked at him. Are we? He didn't answer. Because freedom didn't come easy. Not for people like them. Not when love had been wrapped in secrets, and survival meant lies, and peace only came when the worst parts of you had already been spent. But they were alive, and that was a start. It started with silence, like something had gone still in Sadie's chest. Like her own heartbeat no longer felt like hers. She and Rufus rode hard from the cabin, leaving Julian buried beneath pine needles and Cadence still bleeding in the snow. Rufus had wanted to light a fire, to burn the place to the ground and erase it all, but Sadie had stopped him. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fear of what might crawl out from the ashes. For a few days, it didn't talk much. Just rode west, toward the ranch, toward something that looked like safety. But the safety didn't last, because someone else had been watching. It started with the ranch's fence, cut clean through. Then the barn, doors wide open when they swore they'd latched them. The chickens gone, tools missing, small signs, all quiet, all wrong. Then the fire. It was in the west field, small, fast, put out in minutes. But there was no storm, no lightning, no reason. Rufus found a cigar stub in the grass. Sadie's stomach dropped. Who else knew about the cipher? Rufus didn't answer, just went inside and started checking the rifles. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Sadie whispered, "What if it's not over?" Rufus stared at the ceiling. "It's never over. We just pretend it is." But pretending stopped working the next day. Sadie went to town for medicine, rode in alone. Rufus stayed to fix the barn. She was only gone an hour when she saw the first familiar face at the apothecary, Tom Doyle, the quiet rancher who used to trade tobacco with her father. She remembered him as kind, gray-haired, always polite, but now his hands trembled when he saw her. "Sadie," he muttered, looking behind her like someone might be listening. "I didn't know you were back." She narrowed her eyes. "Why do you care?" Doyle leaned closer. "Because I gave something to Cadence." Years ago. Something I shouldn't have. What? Your father's ledger. Sadie froze. I didn't know what she was after then, Doyle said, voice cracking. She paid well. Said she needed proof of some old debt. I thought it was nothing, but I think she used it to build that cipher. And if that's true, Sadie stepped back. Then there's still something left. Doyle nodded slowly. There's always something left. When she returned home, Rufus was waiting with a rifle in his lap and a dead rabbit at his feet. Someone's been in the east barn, he said. Found tracks. Sadie stared at the woods. They're not here for the cipher. Rufus looked at her. What then? Me? He didn't argue, didn't question, just stood and started packing saddlebags. They rode out that night, headed south, away from everything. But they didn't make it far. At the ridge, just past Hollow Creek, a figure stepped from the brush, rifle raised. It was Julian, alive, bleeding from the side, pale as ash but standing. Put it down, Rufus growled. Julian didn't. You should have killed me better. Sadie blinked. How are you alive? He spat blood. Cadence missed the lung. Barely. Rufus aimed. Why are you here? To finish what she started. You were working for her. No, Julian said. I was working for me. I used Cadence. I used Sadie. I used everyone. Because your father ruined everything, Sadie. He promised gold and left debt. He promised secrets and gave nothing. I followed you to find what he hid. Sadie's voice cracked. There's nothing left. Julian's eyes flared. Then I'll burn what's left of you. He fired first. Missed. Rufus shot back. Hit Julian in the thigh. Julian collapsed, screaming, cursing. Rufus stepped forward. Aim again. Don't, Sadie said softly. Rufus looked at her. He won't stop. I know, she said. But killing him makes us like them. Rufus hesitated, then lowered the gun. Julian groaned. You think this ends here? You think mercy saves you? That ledger. What's in it? There are men who'd kill for less. Sadie stepped close. Then let them come. They rode away, leaving Julian screaming behind them. But the damage was done. The next morning, Rufus woke to find Sadie gone. Not a note, not a word, just gone. He searched every trail, every creek, found her tracks by the river, followed them until they vanished. 3 days passed. Then a letter arrived at the post in town. Rufus, I love you. That's the truth. But loving you doesn't erase what I did. I carried lies longer than I carried my own name. And if I stay, you'll get dragged down too. I need to bury this myself. Don't follow me. Sadie followed anyway. Tracked her across 2 counties, through ghost towns and old mining routes. Asked barkeeps, ranchers, mail carriers. Most hadn't seen her. A few had. One said she was headed toward Durango. Another said she was sick, coughing blood. Rufus didn't sleep more than 2 hours a night. When he found her, she was collapsed behind a church in Montrose. Feverish. Thin. She looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. You weren't supposed to come. He knelt beside her. You think I was going to let you vanish again? She shook her head. I thought if I died out here, it'd be clean. Like a final chapter. He pulled her into his arms. Nothing's ever clean. They stayed in Montrose for 2 weeks. She recovered slowly. But the fever had burned something in her, made her quieter, more fragile. One night, she woke screaming. Said she saw her father in the dark. Said he whispered to her about the ledger. That's when Rufus made the decision. They would go back. One last time. To the place it started. Her father's old saloon in Red Hollow. It was boarded up now. Dust on every beam. Broken glass. But under the floorboards, behind a loose brick, they found it. The real ledger. Her father's final notes. His debts. His threats. The bribes. The names. All of it. Sadie read it silently for hours. Then closed it and handed it to Rufus. Burn it, she said. He didn't ask why. He just did. The fire lit up the old saloon like judgment. When the last page turned to ash, Sadie exhaled, long and shaky. I crossed every line, she whispered. I lied to you. Used you. Tried to disappear. Rufus held her hand. I crossed on my own. Do you forgive me? He didn't speak. He just pulled her close. Because some things didn't need answers. Some betrayals lived in silence. Some truths shattered what love built. But sometimes, rarely, what broke could still be held, even if the cracks always showed. It was the rain that marked the final turn, hard, steady, merciless. It came down like a curtain being drawn, gray and heavy, as if the sky itself wanted to wash away what Sadie was about to do. She and Rufus had returned to Red Hollow under the cover of dusk, but dawn had caught them too soon. The town looked like a corpse, half alive, half buried. The saloon was gone now, leveled after the fire. But word had gotten out. Men had come looking, not just any men. Sadie recognized two of them the second she saw them waiting near the church steps. Kane Mercer and Judge Thorne. Her father's oldest debts made flesh. They'd hunted her father across 3 counties before he paid them off with lies and promises of gold. Now, they'd come to collect what they believed she still had. Rufus stepped in front of her, hand near his hip. "You know them. I know what they want." Kane Mercer spoke first. His voice was all gravel. "We came for the ledger, Miss Dalton." "It's gone," she said. Judge Thorne smiled, slow and mean. "Then we'll take what's left." Sadie didn't flinch. "There's nothing left." "You're wrong," Thorne said. "There's always blood." Rufus drew his revolver, but Sadie touched his wrist. "No," he looked at her. "You said not to let them." I said no." Thorne watched them with narrowed eyes, as if trying to figure out who would break first. "You think you can end this with silence, girl? Your father owed. That debt lives in you." Sadie stepped forward, rain dripping from her lashes. "Then take it from me." "No." Rufus moved toward her, but she turned and shook her head once. Kane Mercer raised his gun. "Don't," she said, voice hollow. "Not in front of the church." Kane's hand didn't lower, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the tremble in her lip. Maybe the ghost in her eyes. Thorne spat. "You're bluffing." "Try me." Kane lowered the gun. "She's not bluffing." Sadie turned her back on them and walked up the steps to the old chapel. She pushed open the doors and stepped inside. She didn't pray. She didn't weep. She just sat. Rufus followed her in minutes later. "I thought you were going to let them kill you." "I almost did." "Why?" "Because it would have been easier than living with what I've done." He sat beside her, wet and angry. "You don't get to leave again. Not like that. I wasn't trying to leave you. I was trying to leave who I was." "Same thing." She looked at him, eyes red. "You don't understand. My father kept that ledger for a reason. Not to settle debts, but to control people. And I used it the same way. I wanted to escape, but I used what he left me to manipulate the ones who helped me." Rufus stared ahead. "You're not him." "I'm not sure anymore." They sat in silence until the storm eased. But peace didn't last. That night, they were ambushed on the trail just outside town. 4 men. Thorne's hired guns. They didn't ask questions. The first bullet grazed Rufus's shoulder. The second hit the horse. Sadie screamed as they were thrown. She hit the ground hard, breath knocked from her lungs. Rufus rolled beside her, bleeding. Gunfire cracked the dark. Rufus fired back, blind. Missed. Sadie crawled, dragged Rufus behind a fallen log. Her hand shook. "We're going to die," she said. Rufus coughed blood. "Maybe." She looked at the pistol in his hand. Took it. "No, we're not." She rose, stepped out from the log, and fired. Twice. 2 men dropped. The others fled. She stood there, soaked in rain and blood and silence. It was over. She dropped the gun. Rufus groaned. "Remind me never to cross you." She laughed, then sobbed, then dropped to her knees beside him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he said. "You came back." She tore a strip from her dress and pressed it to his wound. "You're going to be fine." "You don't know that." "I do." He caught her hand. "We're both going to carry this forever." She nodded. "I know." In the days that followed, they stayed hidden. The fallout came slow. The sheriff in Red Hollow found Thorne's men buried in shallow graves. Kane Mercer disappeared. The judge left town and never came back. But Sadie stayed, because the final debt wasn't to them. It was to herself. She started visiting the church, rebuilt the porch with her own hands, fixed the roof with Rufus when he healed. She planted vegetables in the back, taught children to read. People in town began to speak her name without spitting it. But scars stayed. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the fields burned gold, Rufus asked her, "Do you regret it?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "I regret not telling you sooner. About the ledger. About my part in all of it." He nodded. "But not loving me?" She shook her head. "That's the only thing I did right." He reached for her hand, held it. "I never wanted to be someone who needed saving," she said. "You didn't." "You sure?" He smiled. "I'm sure. Because you're the one who pulled the trigger. Not me." The air was warm, the wind quiet. But somewhere inside her, the storm still lived. And she knew life would never go back to simple. Not after everything they'd lost. Not after everything they'd chosen. But for once, she wasn't running from the weight of it. She stood in it, breathed it in, and stayed. The winter came early that year, biting and bitter, like it had something personal to say. The hills around Red Hollow were frosted in silence, and the roads turned to frozen veins stretching nowhere. The town itself didn't talk much anymore. Not about the fire, not about the deaths, and certainly not about Sadie Dalton. But they watched her. She was different now. Not softer, just clearer, like glass after a storm. She moved with purpose, kept her hair tied back, her sleeves rolled up. She spent most mornings repairing the back wall of the church, then took supplies out to the edge of town, where the last of the widows and broken ranchers barely got by. No one asked why. They just let her be. Rufus still walked with a limp. The bullet hadn't gone deep, but the wound had infected. He got through it with a fever in her hand in his the whole time. When he finally stood again, she didn't cry. She just nodded like she already knew he'd make it. But their silences were different now. There were days he'd catch her staring at the horizon with a look like she was waiting for something. Or someone. Kay Mercer's body was never found. Judge Thorne sent a telegram a few weeks after the ambush. It read, "Debt settled. Ledger gone. Stay quiet, or I won't." Sadie burned it in the stove without a word. But she knew he'd return. Not to fight, but to bury what was left of her. She couldn't stop that. Not entirely. The past doesn't rot, it waits. Still, she tried to make something real out of what was left. That's how the schoolhouse began. One crooked table and 6 borrowed chairs. She used pages torn from her father's ledgers, the ones that didn't hold secrets, to teach math. Taught reading with old sermons. Taught dignity by showing up every day, even when no one said thank you. And slowly, the town came back to her. A baker started leaving bread on the steps of her porch. The blacksmith offered her horseshoes without asking for coin. The sheriff, who once turned his back when men went missing, now nodded at her from across the street. But redemption didn't come clean. It came tangled with grief and ghosts and the kind of pain that only lives inside the one still breathing. Rufus never spoke much about what they did that night. He didn't need to. Some things hang between two people forever. He joined a new ranching crew north of town, earned enough to keep them afloat. Came home dusty and sore but whole. He smiled more now, but it never quite reached his eyes. One night, after supper, she asked him, "Would you do it again?" He looked up slow. "Which part?" "All of it. Taking me in, running, killing for me." He didn't answer for a long time. Then, finally, "I'd do it again. But I'd ask you not to lie next time." She nodded. That was fair. Later, when she lay in bed listening to the wind, she thought about all the men who'd crossed her father and how none of them ever really made it out clean. Even the ones who lived carried something darker inside. The kind of weight you don't put down, not ever. Her redemption wasn't pure. It was bartered. She'd gotten out of the game, but only because she'd stained her hands worse than her father ever did. She used the ledger to blackmail, then destroyed it when it no longer served her. She told herself it was justice, but maybe it was just survival. There was one last page she kept, tucked under a loose floorboard. A single name, John Wesley Prescott. A banker, a friend of Thorne's. The man who first introduced her father to blackmail as a business. He was still alive, still taking land from broken families, still untouchable. And some nights, she thought about going after him, but she never did, because that road had no end, and Rufus had rebuilt the fence by hand, and the children were starting to write their own names in charcoal. And one of the widows had just given birth to a girl she'd named after her, Sadie. That was enough. Redemption wasn't clean, but it was something. Then, in the spring, the ironic twist she never expected arrived, wearing braids and a pistol. Cassidy Mercer, Kane's daughter. She came into town on a mule and asked for Sadie by name. Not loudly, not with anger, just enough that people noticed. Sadie met her outside the church. They stood in the grass, sun overhead, birds loud in the trees. Cassidy didn't say hello. She said, "You killed my father." Sadie didn't flinch. "You tried to kill me." Cassidy nodded. "I know. I didn't want it. But you didn't stop it either." Sadie didn't argue. Cassidy studied her a long time. "He was a bastard. My whole life, he told me I'd never be free of his debts. I know what that feels like. I read the ledgers. Found one in his saddlebag." Sadie stiffened. "Which one?" "The last one. The one that named you." Sadie's throat dried. "Then you know everything." Cassidy took a breath. "I know what you did, and I know you stopped." They stood in silence. Then Cassidy said, "You owe me nothing," and walked away. No threats, no gunfire, no revenge. Just a girl unspooling the past and deciding it wasn't hers to carry. Sadie watched her go, heart pounding, breath shallow. That was the twist, wasn't it? That sometimes the ones you expect to destroy you are the only ones who let you live. Months passed. The land thawed. The schoolhouse grew. Children laughed again. And though the past never left her, it no longer led her. Sadie Dalton, the gambler's daughter, who once held the weight of 10 men's sins in her hands, now carried pencils and hymn books. She gave grace without asking for it back. She loved Rufus quietly, steadily. No need for promises. They'd already survived the worst. And in the end, she understood something her father never did. That power wasn't in secrets. It was in choosing not to use them. She never dug up the floorboard again, because some stories end best when left buried, even if they still whisper